obviously chairing in a nice way isn't my speciality. I'm just too bossy for that, so that's great. So we need to start this relatively promptly because we only have, this is a very short session. In part because, as I said earlier, and I will embarrass Lisa when she gets up in a moment, but in part because our host city is very, very important to both me and the rest of the colleagues in the Institute and DePaul University. And I think one of the things I always admire and love about the colleagues I've met over the years in Chicago is their candid, honest way of going about business and the way that they try to get things done, and they do get a lot done, but they're never ever complacent. And as some of you have already seen and commented in the last 24 hours, there are clearly human beings that sleep and inhabit the streets of Chicago. And there are no less people that see that as a problem and want to do something about it than the two people I'm about to introduce you to. But with no further ado, I would like to hand over to Nonie Brennan, who is the Chief Executive Officer, Chief Executive Officer of All Chicago. Over to Nonie. Thank you.
Welcome to Chicago. I thought I'd start off by telling you just a couple of little interesting facts about the city we are all in together right now. First of all, did you know that Chicago has many nicknames? Chicago is known as the second city. We can't figure out who the first city is, but we are known as the second city. Chicago is known as the city by the lake. Chicago is known as the city of broad shoulders. But my favorite is Chicago is known as the city that works. Chicago has an incredibly rich history. In fact, in 1871, Chicago survived the Great Chicago Fire. If you can imagine that right where we all are at this very moment was reduced to rubble. The fire destroyed a 4-mile wide stretch right along the lake, 4 miles long and 1 mile wide. 300 people died in that fire, and 100,000 people became homeless. In 1893, Chicago was the host of the World Exhibition. 27 million people came to Chicago for that exhibition from around the world. It's incredible to think that within 22 years, this city went from rubble to hosting a huge world exhibition with 27 million guests. Do you know how Chicago rebuilt the city from the rubble? They did it by working together. That's how we address homelessness in Chicago. We work together. We use a collective impact approach. Our plan to end homelessness, and this is our second plan, Plan 2.0, is our common agenda for the work. Our homeless management information system, which we call HMIS, is our shared measurement system. We share all kinds of activities through our continuum of care work where everybody comes together to work on this issue of homelessness. One of the biggest challenges we have is communication. We try very hard to have continual communication for all stakeholders. And the role that our organization, All Chicago, plays is that backbone organizational role, which is so important to collective impact. One of the things that we've learned over the years is it's never easy to work together. There are all kinds of challenges. But sometimes there are incredible champions who force you to do better. And one of those champions is Fred Friedman. I wanted to talk a little bit about Fred. The first thing I have to say is he's the smartest person that I've ever met. He grew up in Michigan, where he went to the University of Michigan, which is one of the great universities in this country. And then he came to Chicago to go to law school. And after that, he had a career as an attorney. Through it all, he struggled with debilitating mental health issues. At one point, Fred told me, for 2 years, he was fighting for dominance of his couch with his dog. I said to him, Fred, why didn't you take medication to help you? And he really helped me understand what mental illness meant, because he said, Nonie, I could not raise my hand to grab the medication if it was on the table beside me. As Fred struggled with depression, he lost his job as an attorney. He lost his wife of 25 years, and he lost his home. And he ended up in Chicago's homeless system. But remember, I told you that Fred was a champion. Because from the very early days of our work together in Chicago, Fred sat at our community table and he said, no decisions about us without us. For many years, he was the lone voice with that mantra. But he forced us all to listen. He challenged us all to do better. He had a different vision for what was possible, and he helped all of us see that vision. I just want Fred to stand up for a minute so the whole world can thank him. Now, what I have to tell you is that if Fred is going to be in any of your sessions over the next couple of days, I want you to know that he will challenge you to do better. And that's why we want him here, and that's what we want him to do. But ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the city of Chicago. Welcome to the city that works together to end homelessness. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Morrison Butler, and it is my honor and privilege to lead the Chicago Department of Family and Support Services. We are the Human Service and Social Service arm of city government. I want to thank Dame Louise and Kat Johnson and the IGA Advisory Board, DePaul International, all of you for being here with us and for being in our wonderful city. It's really great to be here, and it's an honor to speak with you today. It's important as we do our work to remember that homeless people are people first. They have many stories, and recently some of them have been in the news. Stephen Johnson, a homeless man sleeping outdoors near the Manchester Arena in Manchester, England, rushed to help as many victims as he could during that horrible attack. His compassion is what is striking about Stephen Jones, not his homelessness. He is a person who rushed to help others when they needed him. And all of you gathered in this room rushed to help the other Stephen Joneses of the world. And so I thank you for that. Homelessness is a complicated issue, and there is no one-size-fits-all solution. In Chicago, we have seen a decrease in homelessness recently. Mayor Emanuel, my boss, is dedicated to making sure that all Chicagoans have a place to call home. Through his leadership and because of his sense of urgency, we have had to get creative in order to impact the issue of homelessness here. Our point-in-time count in 2013 revealed a 13% drop in homelessness over the previous year. Again, in 2017, we saw a 3% drop in homelessness in Chicago from the year before. We are glad to see these declines, but we do not celebrate. There are still literally thousands of people living on the streets of Chicago, and tens of thousands more living in unstable conditions. People who are sleeping on a friend's couch or doubled up with family. We know we have to continue to get creative in our solutions and in our outreach. Barring any major downturns in the economy, and I have my fingers crossed, we think we will continue to see a drop in homelessness due to our efforts focused on better coordination, addressing the chronic homeless population, improving our systems and processes in order to reduce waste and duplication, and our commitment to incorporating best practices from around the country and around the world. We attribute most of the drop over the last 2 years to our efforts in the Ending Veterans Homelessness Initiative. You already heard some of you about that this morning. We call it EVHI. When the White House under the Obama administration called upon mayors around the U.S. to commit to the goal of ending homelessness amongst veterans in 2015, Mayor Rahm Emanuel raised his hand. In Chicago, this effort brought together more than 30 public and private partners, each of whom had their own assessment tool, their own outreach strategies, their own databases for tracking progress. We were a committed but clumsy collective, learning how to trust one another, learning how to track progress, how to use data to inform our decisions, and how to make continuous improvements has truly transformed the way that we approach veterans homelessness in Chicago. The city government is a leader, but not the leader in this process. As the city's highest ranking elected official, Mayor Emanuel owns this issue in the minds of voters and residents, but he recognizes that we cannot solve this by ourselves. We've learned that it takes every single partner in order to achieve the goal, and though it has been really messy and difficult, and we have argued with each other, and we've been frustrated with each other, we are proud of the fact that as of this point, we have housed more than 3,000 veterans since we started this initiative in 2015. We continue to work to ensure that all veterans are properly engaged, assessed, and housed through the creation of a single intake system that we call our One List. We know them by name, and that's important to us, that we know them by name, that they are people and not just a data point. We recognize that part of our success, however, with the Veterans Initiative was attributed to the fact that the federal government made it a priority. We were able to use the bully pulpit of federal funding to bring all of the partners to the table. Some came reluctantly. Lastly, our thinking and our language has evolved. We have moved from the idea that we would solve or end homelessness for veterans toward a concept called functional zero. Functional zero essentially means that a city has a well-coordinated and efficient community system that ensures veterans homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring, and that no veteran is forced to live on the street. We are not there yet, but we know where we are going. We are also actively involved with the Chicago Continuum of Care, a public-private planning body with representatives from local, state, and federal government, and a broad base of constituency groups, including people with lived homelessness experience. Individual program performance remains important. However, our updated program models chart strives to demonstrate how each program and its performance contributes to the outcomes of the overall system. The Chicago Department of Family and Support Services and All Chicago, serving as the backbone of the continuum, release a quarterly system performance dashboard to more than 100 member organizations who make up the continuum. My department then uses that dashboard in contracts and scopes of services with the nonprofit delegate agencies that we fund who work on the homeless issue. The continuum of care not only allows us to coordinate better, but it allows our efforts to be more outcomes focused. In the midst of all this, Mayor Emanuel has been insistent that we learn how to better coordinate within city government. So last year, he launched a task force of the 16 departments that touch homeless individuals on the streets of Chicago. And while my department, the Department of Family and Support Services, may be the face to residents on homelessness, we are not the only city department. Homeless individuals interact with our Parks Department, our police, our fire, our buildings, streets and sanitation. There is, like I said, 16 different departments that engage with homeless people in Chicago. We are moving further out of our silos, but we're not there yet. And it's really hard to get people to do that. We are set up as separate agencies. We all have separate organizational cultures and structures. And until this work, this idea of working together becomes embedded in our behavior, we cannot take our eyes off this aspect of improving our response to homelessness in Chicago. We are becoming more comfortable with the notions of continuous learning and improvement. We're developing our muscle for taking successes and challenges from past efforts like veterans and applying them to other homeless subpopulations. Such was the case with the chronic homeless pilot. In April 2016, we began a special effort focused on what was at that time the largest encampment, tent encampment in the city. We were intrigued to learn if we could work collectively even without the bully pulpit of federal funding that had been at the heart of the Veterans Initiative. So we set out to house 75 individuals living under what we call the viaducts. They're like bridges to the rest of the world, living under the viaducts along North Lakeshore Drive. To date, we've housed 73 of the 75, but new people moved into that same space, and we are struggling now to keep pace. This initiative motivated us to look deeper into the processes that city government actually control. We literally have been mapping out the process between assessment and housing in order to try to understand the flow of work, the steps, and the time that it takes to move from assessment to housing in Chicago. Right now, we are averaging about 240 days, way, way, way off the federal benchmark, which is 90. And it's our goal to understand the processes that the city government has under its control to see what we can do our part to reduce the number of days that it currently takes to get a person from assessment to housing in Chicago. Simple goal, challenging task. We also look for best practices around the U.S. and around the world. One such example is a new program we have going on this year called A Day for Change. Based on a similar program in Albuquerque, New Mexico, A Day for Change focuses on panhandlers and offers them an opportunity to earn a day's wage for their labor. Working with a nonprofit organization that we fund, 2 vans, both of whom have a driver and a social worker, travel around the city during the day trying to engage panhandlers and offer them the opportunity to work for a day. During that day's work, a social worker attempts to approach those individuals to see if they might be interested in taking up any of our services or programs. Our goal here is simple: to connect with individuals where they are, to earn their trust, and over time, to hopefully get them to take the services that we provide. In closing, we have moved the needle a teeny bit here in Chicago in some places, but we have so much more to do, so much more we can do, so much more we must do. We are attempting to strike a delicate balance. Mayor Emanuel has set the tone. In Chicago, we will treat our homeless residents with dignity and respect. In Chicago, we believe that every person has a right to shelter. But in Chicago, we do not want to make it so comfortable to be on the streets that individuals given a choice and an opportunity to connect with services and programs would turn them down and choose to stay there. This balance is incredibly difficult for us to achieve. We do not get it right every time, but we want to. We are trying to, and we will not give up. Over this past year, I have gotten to know a man named Lewis who lives under the bridges on North Lakeshore Drive in Chicago. Lewis has, in his own words, battled addictions, and he has been incarcerated, and both of these conditions make housing him in Chicago very difficult. But Lewis deserves a home, as I do, as each of you do, and I worry about him. For me, Lewis is the face of homelessness in Chicago. Lewis calls me Lisa. It is important that we know each other's names. That level of intimacy means that we have a bond. That bond makes me accountable. That bond is personal. Housing people should be personal. I hope that each of you has your own Lewis. During this conference, I look forward to learning from you so that I can do a better job for Lewis. Together we can get this done. Together we can find Lewis a home. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I have to say, she wouldn't let me introduce her because I would be too nice about Lisa, but I did a very British thing, which is I bought a pie in a city that has too many pies already.
I killed that pie, by the way.
And that's one of the key differences between us, is you can kill pie and I kill pie, and look at the difference between us. But anyway, I can make that joke. If anybody else in the room makes that joke, they won't leave the building. So let me just put it that way. And also, just whilst I have a moment, Lisa Rodriguez is here today, as is Moira McCauley, who are also part of the team here in Chicago, doing just an amazing job. We have time, if that's okay with everybody, just for if there are any questions or comments. I'm sure you'd be up for taking them, if you've got any. Yeah. Any views? Excellent.
Yeah.
Do you mind saying who you are and what country you're
yeah.
from, just so the Commissioner and Nonie know where we are?
I'm Indu Prakash Singh from India, and working with the homeless work since 17 years. I must first of all applaud what you spoke, and surely you came very honestly about the way you're addressing this, and kudos to the good work you're doing. We of course landed in Chicago yesterday as well, and we did see a couple of homeless people around Chicago. So, and as I said, like the approach is from veteran to other homeless. So just a question, we do know that the homeless that we did see on the streets looked surely, into alcohol or drugs or whatever, and with some mental issues. So the challenges are very high, for sure. It's not so easy, and just can say all the best for the effort they're putting in. I would just say, like, if you can just also say how difficult it is to reach that last person. What Mahatma Gandhi in my country spoke about, that if you have to rate the success of any country or any planning, you need to plan for the last person. So how easy, how difficult is it? And surely I know that you'll be able to reach the last person in a couple of years' time. So when is it that you think that all Chicago is going to incorporate all homeless people? By which year, which date? I know it's difficult, but I felt tempted to ask you this question because you are amazing.
I think that's a great question. We learned, for instance, from when we did the chronic homeless pilot on North Lakeshore Drive. The truth is, we did our assessment April 5th and 6th of 2016, and as of today, there's still people that are in that pilot that we haven't housed. Our challenge here isn't necessarily assessing them. I think we've come a long way, and you've heard in different workshops about the work that we've put into the tools that we use. It's not necessarily our data. I'm somewhat of a data geek, and so data just always leads you to more data, which in and of itself is kind of a rabbit hole. But that's not the problem. The problem we're really having here is getting people into housing. And even with veterans, for instance, where there was more will, in America right now, if you're a veteran or a senior, it's kind of hard for a community to say no to you. So it makes sense that we started with those initiatives. No one wants to stand up in America and say, I don't want to house a veteran. But even with those veterans, as you get to your more complex individuals, you have individuals who have significant mental health issues, individuals who have significant backgrounds. And so landlords aren't eager to take them. And so we definitely are running into some challenges. One of the things we're doing right now is we're trying to do a scan of our units in town to really understand how many units do we currently have that are truly available for folks. So I think we are some ways away here from being able to say that, that we would have achieved functional zero for Chicago. I don't know right now, and I don't want to speak for everyone else. This is truly a community effort. From my department's standpoint, I think we are driving toward the idea of functional zero. We really do want to build a system where people that experience homeless would find that it was rare and brief and non-recurring. I think that's the thing we're trying to build. I don't know that I can ever build a thing where no one will ever experience homelessness. There's too many triggers that I don't have control over. But I do think we can build that other system. But we need more affordable housing. We need more social service supports. Some of these folks will never be okay living on their own. And trying to figure out how you fund that in a city of this size, That's a real challenge.
And I would add that I know we've done a lot of talking on Saturday and today about the Ending Veterans Homelessness Initiative, and people have said, well, what about everybody else, and how are you addressing homelessness as a whole? But one of the things that I can say without question is that through the Ending Veterans Homelessness Initiative, we have learned how to end homelessness. When the commissioner mentioned that we've had 2 years of reductions in the number of of people who are experiencing homelessness in our community, that comes after many years of the number continually going up. So we've learned how to do things differently. We've learned how to do things together. We've learned how to trust and use the data to make change. So we have had this incredible opportunity to really learn this work and move it forward. The other thing I would say in answer to that question is, as the commissioner also mentioned, we have one list and we know everybody by name. We have one female veteran on that list who has been homeless in Chicago for almost 5,000 days. She is in a transitional housing program, and to her, that's home. And so talking to her about moving into permanent housing, she believes she is home, and so any kind of a change or taking her away from home is not what she sees in her future. And so there are multiple challenges, but we would never have known that if we hadn't been on the journey and taken the path that we have.
It's also, one of the other things about a city this size is it's not illegal to be homeless in Chicago, and I never miss the chance to point that out. Homelessness isn't intended as a slight against you. You know, if you have to walk out of your $1 million home and pass a person on the street who is struggling, trust me, they didn't get up that morning and think, how can I get on your nerves as you're on your way to your job? So this balance that we try to strike between respect for them and treating them with dignity, and yet at the same time, we do want people to take services. And so I will tell you, it's really, really hard. It's hard for us, and I think we really struggle with it. And if you were to graph how we do, it sure wouldn't look like a solid line. I mean, you know, we take a step, we do okay, we take 2 steps back, we take a step, we try to do something, we take 3 steps back. I think one of the reasons I'm so excited to be with all of you is I think we have to encourage our communities here and all around the world to talk about homelessness and get people to stop being mad when they see homeless people. You know, let it break your heart, let it frustrate you, or if you want to be mad, don't be mad at the homeless people. Let's find something else to direct our anger at. But I definitely feel like here in Chicago, we could do better to have a citywide conversation about how people come into homelessness, why they are there, what is truly available to them, how hard it is to get yourself out of homelessness once you arrive there. And those are some of the reasons why we're so excited to be a part of this over the next couple of days.
Okay, I'll take a couple more contributions, and then I won't hold you from your lunch. Jeff from San Francisco, isn't it?
Jason, Jeff's over there. Apropos of what you said, has Chicago undertaken any...
Just need the mic
right.
translation, this is
All right.
my fault. Now, Nonie is actually doing my job for me, but you know, that's great. Team effort.
Apropos of your comment, has Chicago found any way to reduce the emotional distancing between homeless people and housed people? The anger, the vituperative anger that we experience in San Francisco on the part of housed people who see homeless folks on their way to work and sometimes see large encampments, quite significant. Have you found any strategies that work to reduce the emotional distance?
No, we haven't. And one of the things I'm kind of fascinated by, and I can never remember which city it is, but some city somewhere in the US was able to get all of their media outlets, every single one of them, print and broadcast on a single day to cover homelessness.
That was San Francisco.
Okay, so I think that would be really fascinating here. I think that it would be great to tell people, we don't care what angle you cover it from. If you want to be the guy that's mad and do an editorial, be the guy that's mad. We've got a number of reporters here that really care deeply about this issue, and they cover everything we do. I would love it if we could have a citywide conversation and simply highlight for Chicagoans at large the complexity that is homelessness. I think that would be a beginning. I'm also frustrated. I've only been in government for 2 years, and I've had other experiences. One of them was in the corporate world where I was responsible for marketing. And I tell you, if I had the budget to communicate that I had there, that we could do a lot. But I mean, you have to be able to talk to people regularly. It's about hearing that message multiple times, and we just don't get to do that as government.
And can I add something to that, because I think it's an important point, and that is political influence. And so sometimes it's really challenging for us because we have a Plan 2.0, we have a huge community of stakeholders who are focused on moving ahead with those goals. We have developed a process for how we do our work. But people who aren't satisfied or who are upset about the homeless issue will sometimes take a back door to the mayor or to the mayor's office or to other strong political leaders and make a point, which then creates a situation where we might be asked to move off of our goal. And so that's really hard for us, particularly when we're making progress. And this is the first time we've seen this kind of progress. And so how we communicate, not just with the general public, but how we sort of close that back door of influence that might take us off of our community's priorities is another challenge for us.
And see, I love Nonie because that's her job to point that out, and it's my job to point out that mayors get elected. So when important people call mayors, mayors are going to respond. And for all of those of us who work on an issue, we have to understand the balance. A mayor, and that's why I said in my remarks, that the mayor believes he owns this because residents and voters think he does. And so as long as that's the case anywhere, then he has to be able to weigh in even when there is a plan as good as 2.0 and a partner as good as my general here to my right.
Amy, do you mind just saying who you are and where you're from? Anybody else this month? I'm going to take Amy, then the gentleman over there, then the gentleman at the back, and then I think we may have to call it a day.
Okay, thanks. I'm Amy Klein with the Harry and Jeanette Weinberg Foundation in Baltimore, and I'm also part of the Continuum of Care in Baltimore City. And my question is about the mayor, because we have a new mayor, and I am on a work group to advise the mayor on her response to homelessness. And we know of utmost importance is, as we have framed it, we want her to make homelessness one of her top five priorities, and to tell us if she will not, because our approach needs to be different whether it is or it is not. So I wondered if Lisa, you could give a few specific examples of how Mayor Emanuel owns this. What are some specific actions that he takes that you could advise us to advise our mayor to demonstrate that this is a priority?
Well, I think that for instance, the fact that the Obama administration made the original pitch to end veterans homelessness, and that Mayor Emanuel had been the president's first chief of staff, I think there was a natural connection there that obviously wouldn't exist everywhere. But what I can tell you is that my department, there are 7 areas of vulnerability that the Department of Family and Support Services focuses on. I talk to the mayor about homelessness weekly. I do not talk to him about every other issue area weekly. I talk to him about homelessness. He rides around, and when he's on his way home, especially in the evenings after a long day, he will ride down streets, and where he sees people, he will call. He will literally call. 9 o'clock at night, 7 a.m. on Saturday when he's on his way to yoga. It's just like, this thing really, really, really hits him. And so that's one thing. He has put personal capital into trying to help us find the first local source of dedicated funding for homelessness we've ever had. And that's something that he did working with the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, who are here with us as well. And that was to dedicate the home sharing funding to homelessness, and so it's the very first time that we've had a dedicated local source of funding. So we sure feel his enthusiasm, and oftentimes, let's just be honest, his wrath. He's an intense guy. Everything you've heard is true. And so when he's not happy, you know about it. But he, and the other thing that's true in Chicago right now, and you all know this, we're having some challenges with violence. And so he feels like that, and this is a quote, he said, "Lisa, I feel like the city is on fire." And so he doesn't want to lose ground. And he feels like that we've made some ground on the homeless issue, and let's fight to continue to move that in the right direction, because we are really struggling on the violence piece to solve that.
And I just want to add really quickly, one thing that I think has been really helpful to us is that with the Ending Veterans Homelessness Initiative, we really struggled to figure this out at the beginning, and we were sort of falling over each other and falling over the concept of this. And the mayor asked his office to meet with us every month. And we would have to go into that meeting and talk about what our success was when we didn't have any, and when we only had problems. And so it was very tense to go into those meetings and not be able to talk about anything that was working well. And so that gave us such incredible motivation to get this shit right, because we didn't want to show up there and be humiliated month after month.
Can I just say that having now, sorry, Kat. I'm on my 4th Prime Minister in the United Kingdom after 18 years, and so politicians are, one, they have to go and get themselves elected, and I don't. So I think there has to be a sort of starting point really around, as much as the moment we may not like a lot of the politicians that are leading the world, nevertheless we have to understand the dynamics in some countries of what democracy looks like. That's one thing. The thing about all of this is it's solvable. And there aren't many things in politics where you can walk in a room and you can say, if we do these 5 things consistently, you can make a visible difference to something the public are either uncomfortable with or upset about, angry about, on the whole spectrum that you've talked about. You may not be able to solve the whole of homelessness in your city or area, but you can take some area and do something about it. And I find going for vulnerable groups, i.e. women on the streets, disabled people, people with multiple problems, very hard for politicians to say, yeah, sod it, leave them out there, I'd quite like to see them die there. The thing is, no mayor or any politician is going to say, no, we're not going to engage. They might say that it's one of the many priorities, so they're not going to give you a straight answer, Amy, and say, we're either fully engaged or no, we're not. They'll say, we've got a million of things we're going to tackle in our next term, of which we're very keen on making sure it's housing, homelessness or something else. They won't give you a straight answer, so there's no point even thinking about it. Right, gentleman over there, and then I'll try not to answer the Commissioner and Nonie's questions. Do you mind reminding us who you are and where you come from?
I'm Mike Magyale. I'm an independent consultant researcher, currently based in Uganda, but originally from Kenya. I'd like to thank Nonie for the very warm welcome, and Lisa for a wonderful presentation.
You need to use the microphone a bit.
I'd just like to ask Lisa to perhaps say a bit more about something that she said. You said you're trying to make homeless people less comfortable, something to that effect, right? Now, where I currently live, in Uganda, and also in Kenya, when people talk about homelessness, they usually think about the street children, because that's about the most visible manifestation of homelessness. And you'll find that very often what they try to do, and especially, when they have mega events in the city and you've got all these dignitaries coming in, they round up all the street children, put them into homes or into different programs, but they all, sooner or later, the majority will go back to the streets, yeah? So what else, and we also had in the simultaneous panel that I participated in, Sana from Finland was talking about how they had a program where they were taking people off the street, and they were dying within a very short time of being taken off the street, yeah? And so I'm just wondering, when you said you're trying to make it less, comfortable and encourage them, to go into housing, how you're going about that?
Thank you for the question, because it's dangerous to assume that we're talking often about the same context. So it is not illegal to be homeless in Chicago, and homeless people have rights. And so it's important that when we engage them, that we start from those 2 points. But from the city government standpoint, I'm not speaking on behalf of any of the nonprofit partners who do phenomenal outreach. From a city government standpoint, we represent all citizens. So that means we have to try to strike that balance between the rights of the homeless and the concerns that other citizens and residents of the city have about them. So, for instance, sometimes they would probably just prefer that we leave them alone and go away and leave them on their own, especially sometimes as they have come together in groups that support them. That's, in my experience so far, when they form encampments, those encampments are support groups, if you will. It is extended family, it sometimes is safety, definitely support. So I think sometimes they probably wish we would leave them alone. So we do engage them regularly. We are out there all the time, either through our own outreach team or the outreach teams that we fund. So we try to kind of stay in their face a little bit, and sometimes that can be uncomfortable. Clearly, we go out and we try to then clean those areas. And you're sitting right next to a colleague of mine, Doug Schenkelberg. Doug leads the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. And so we have ongoing dialogue with the coalition about our cleanings. We would clean more, they'd like us to clean less, and so sometimes trying to find that right balance. It's rough on an encampment if you show up in Chicago in minus 15-degree weather to do a wet cleaning. And yet, residents expect to see us come in and clean, because where there are a lot of people living outdoors, even when people try to police themselves, they simply create, there's just garbage. So we engage, we're up there for cleaning. I think those are the 2 main tools that we use. One of the important aspects of the Majors Interagency Task Force on Homelessness, however, was that it also brings my department into the room with other departments, because other departments have a different approach. So trying to make sure that police, for example, when they engage the homeless, are doing so with the right attitude and approach. Trying to be sure that the Parks Department, when they engage homeless people living in parks, that there is some consistency. So we've got some work to do, but we want them to take services. We really do. And so we intend to stay in their face, to continue to engage them, whether it is with direct outreach, whether it is with the Day for Change program. We look for creative ways to try to engage them in order to get them to take the services that we have.
Okay, I think we're completely overrunning on time. I'm a terrible chair. Can you take this gentleman here and then just see how much more time we've got?
Hello, my name is Cameron Cross from You Begin. We offer an online collaboration platform that's helping cross-sector collaboration in specific relation to realising the 2030 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. My question relates to the concept of achieving functional zero in homelessness, and being able to work with the service providers in Chicago to achieve functional zero. I'm wondering what are some of the key challenges that you faced in lining that up and how you've resolved those.
I'll start, but this is a question for both of us. And so for us, I think the first challenge was figuring out what functional zero meant for Chicago. Because we really didn't understand ourselves and we didn't know. And so we've looked at it quite significantly now in terms of veterans homelessness. And just to give this the broadest possible perspective, for veterans who are experiencing homelessness in Chicago, functional zero aligns with the number of GPD beds or grant per diem beds that we have available. because it's really about having a system that works and people are able to move through the system. And we know when we started this effort, we saw that there were about 120 veterans becoming homeless every month. Now we know there's about 82 veterans becoming homeless every month. Even when we house everyone who's on our one list right now, there will still be veterans becoming homeless. And so the goal is to make sure that we are able to accommodate those veterans within our system. And so for us, for veterans homelessness, functional zero is probably going to be somewhere between 250 and 300, depending on what those beds are. But the other thing that's happened in our system is as we've been reducing homelessness, we've changed some of the program models to better account for the way things are now compared to the way they were before. And so it's sort of an ongoing, gentle process that involves learning and understanding, and I think that's the way I could describe it at the moment.
Well, and to maybe take up on that, so you can tell when you get old, I moved in like in and out of different sectors, and so I also ran a nonprofit at one point. And I will tell you, nothing's more maddening than funders and people telling you need to change your program model, but they won't then staff and help you figure out how to do that. And so we do see that collaboration is quite a huge lift for the community of delegate agencies that we rely on to get it done. It is one thing to ask people to collaborate, it's another thing then to understand what it actually takes for them to do that. So Dame Louise mentioned Maura Macaulay, who's in the back of the room. Maura actually had a job inside DFSS before she started running the EVHI initiative for us. But we assigned her to the initiative and it became an obsession. It's literally it's like her full-time job now. Well, we're a big department. So for me to move one of 330 people to manage an initiative full-time, that was still hard, but we could do it. We work with a number of nonprofits that are really small, and to expect them to be able to collaborate and to sit at the table with us, not just today, but forever and ever and ever, because this changes the way you work. We've got to figure out as the funding community how to fund positions that would support collective impact and collaboration, and then to help nonprofits change their organizations in order to be able to work differently.
Sorry, how do you manage competition within that?
Do you mind if I just step in? I'm sorry, I'm seeing people looking at me with daggers about the fact I've now let this session way overrun. The Commissioner and Nonie are here for some time, so if there's any more follow-up questions or anything else, would you mind if you nobble them over lunchtime, if that's okay? Just before you move, just so everybody knows where they're going, there is an optional lunchtime workshop in room 8002, which is about using real-time data to end homelessness.